Thank you, Hannah. So, full disclosure, we have been excited and looking forward to this lecture for a very long time. Jon Alexander is our featured title for the semester, which was The Future of Citizenship. And so we chose the man who literally wrote the book on citizenship. And if you read it, it's brilliant and wonderful. So we're very much looking forward to that today. So let me just introduce Jon. Jon is a strategist, a storyteller, and a connector. His work is devoted to opening the way of the citizen future, one rooted in the deep truth that all of us are smarter than any of us. Jon began his career in advertising, and after a decade there, including winning a prestigious award of the Big Creative Idea of the Year, he decided to make a dramatic change. He was interested in and wanted to know what the impact on society was of commercial messaging and consumerism. So he gathered 3 master's degrees, as one does, and studied consumerism and different alternatives to it in lots of different ways and angles to try to really understand how this is affecting community and society. And the result is our featured title, Citizens, Why the Key to Fixing Everything is All of Us. And if those of you who've read it know its brilliance and it's wonderful, and it's been so fun talking to people, hearing how much they've gotten from the book. But if you need more accolades, Mackenzie has it as one of the top 5 recommended reads in the Summer Reading Guide of 2022. It was described as an underground hit by the Financial Times, selected by the World Economic Forum for its CEO Book Club. In addition to all of this, Jon is a visiting scholar at Harvard University and University of Manchester, and sits on the advisory council at Democracy Next, the Democracy and Culture Foundation, and the Better Politics Freedom. And for all these reasons and more, we are just so thrilled to introduce to you today Jon Alexander. Thank you, Jon.
Is the lapel working? Are we on? Switch is on the top. Thanks, Kelly. Kelly Russell has already sorted me out a few times today. Switch is on the top. Yeah, everybody can hear me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to be a bit selfish though. Which is kind of contrary to what I talk about, because what I'm going to do, because I've got a room full of incredibly smart young humans in front of me, rather than talk about the book I wrote 3 years ago, I'm going to share the ideas from the book I'm trying to write right now. Is that all right? So the plan is to, this is like the second run that I've done with this set of ideas that I'm working on. The first was with some undergrads, a small group of undergrads, politics undergrads at the University College Dublin. So this is second run, and I am genuinely really looking for feedback, ideas, you to tell me that this is a useless framework and I should just like write the same book again. But so if anyone, I'm about to say, Scott, or Kelly maybe, that if anyone has thoughts or questions and stuff, they could email them to you and you could forward them to me. Is that all right? Volunteering Kelly Russell to be the recipient of any feedback that you don't get time for today. Because I'm being quite ambitious. I'm going to try and trot you through a whole framework for how I think, basically I think we could reorganize politics around the world. It's quite an ambitious thing. The subtitle of my first book was
Kennedy Center at BYU.edu.
Kennedy Center
at BYU, then we'll get them all the comments to Jon.
There we go. Kennedy Center at BYU.edu. Everybody happy with that? Okay. And if you don't feel, or if you just want to send something saying I'm very nice, then do that as well. I like to hear that. Yes, I'm going to be quite ambitious. This is a whole kind of framework really for how I think we might reinvent politics around the world, drawing on some of the best of what I've seen around the world, knowing that this is an international studies centre, that feels about right, and I guess I'm trying to inspire some of you guys to go out and look at the future of democracy as it is kind of emerging, and mainly the reason I'm trying to do that is because when people talk about the future of democracy right now, it feels a little bit like we're staring into a chasm and being drawn into it. And I think that there are a lot of people actually standing along the edge of that chasm building bridges, and I think we want to pay attention to them. So the plan is I'm going to share with you a couple of stories to frame this, and then a couple of core frameworks of ideas. And then there's 3 poles of this future of democracy that I'm talking about: the sort of the role of the state, the role of institutions, third-party institutions, and the role of citizens. And I'm going to paint what I think all three of those might look like with some examples from around the world, and then we'll see, hopefully have a bit of time to see what you think. Does that all feel okay? Make sense? Okay, so the first thing I wanted to ask is, has anybody heard of the America in One Room project? No. See, this is my starting point. This thing needs to be famous if the US and the world is actually to get out of the kind of political quagmire that we're in. This is an image of the 526 US citizens randomly selected. Cindy from Poison, Montana. Emily from Kearns, Utah. Kearns, thank you. 74 Californians. So the way this worked was 526 US citizens were randomly selected to be representative of the national population on almost all key demographics, gender, race, age, and so on. And they were brought together in a conference suite in Dallas for 4 days in September 2019. Now, with this representative sampling, 30 people in that sample explicitly self-identified as extremely conservative, and 30-odd people explicitly self-identified as extremely liberal. And the whole project nearly didn't go ahead, the rumour goes. I haven't managed to verify this, but the rumour goes the whole project nearly didn't go ahead because the insurance company tried to charge them too much because they thought that people were going to kill each other. And remember, like I know this is a little while ago, but this was already a very polarized time. The day after this 4-day process concluded was the day that Nancy Pelosi launched the first impeachment proceedings against Trump during the first presidency. So this was a very divided time. And what actually happened in this space was that people came together, they found respect for one another. The quotes from this process are really astounding. There's words like, it turned out we just wanted an excuse to get along. A whole load of opinions shifted. Now the key thing is there are two kinds of polarization in the literature. I don't know if you've had this talked about this year so far, but there is issue polarization, where I disagree with Scott, and then there is affective polarization, where therefore Scott is evil. Does that make sense, the difference between those things? Now, issue polarization decreased significantly. They discussed 26 different policy issues, found much more common ground, moving towards one another on different spectra, but the critical thing was that affective polarization went through the floor, right? Absolutely through the floor, to the extent that there was a follow-up survey the following year which found that actually the majority of these 526 people had become advocates, had become bridge builders, a bit like you guys going out on mission, had become people who tried to sort of minimize polarization in their communities across the states. So this process didn't only kind of find some commonality, enable people to agree on issues which are supposed to be incredibly divisive. It also almost seeded a kind of immune system of depolarization. And yet, no one knows it happened, because the radar is just tuned to look elsewhere. And my argument is actually this shows us at least the possibility and actually some of the processes that could be involved in doing democracy very, very differently. And I'm going to share with you some stories from around the world that have taken that kind of approach even further. But just for now, remember, it was 526 randomly selected people, representatives of the population, brought together for 4 days to deliberate and discuss and meet one another face to face. And my argument is this is a kind of approach to democracy that I'm starting to think of as what I would call citizen democracy, where actually people are seen as sources of ideas and energy and resources, as participants, rather than just as consumers of democracy, where you have to choose between a fixed set of options every few years, and you basically just have to sign up to one or the other in a zero-sum game. And my argument actually is that that's a big part of why we end up with scenes like this from 2021, the Capitol riots. Because, and some of you will know, the QAnon conspiracy theory was sort of quite closely related to this. When people are denied agency, when people feel they have no real voice, and then someone offers something that feels like agency, that the gateway into the QAnon conspiracy theory is essentially, we need you here, here is your first task, be part of this mission to save America. when that need for agency and belonging is appealed to in a context where people feel unheard and like their only options, neither of their options really represent them, becomes very attractive. And so the contrast between America in one room and the Capitol riots, I think, is a really profound one to sort of set me up. Does that make vague sense so far of where I'm going? And what I think underpins that, so this is the core framework of ideas at the heart of all of my work. It's in the book Citizens, and you can dig into it in lots of ways. But the argument really, just to spell it out very briefly, is that all of my work is really about offering a way of understanding the moment in time we're living in through the lens of what I call stories of self and society. And I argue that there are these three stories. And so the easiest way to describe it is as a sort of historical shift. So end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, we lived in something like the subject story, as in subjects of the king. In the subject story, the right thing to do is to keep your head down, do as you're told, get what you're given, on the basis that there are a God-given few who know best, who will lead us to the best outcomes for society. The rest of us should just do as we're told, in that logic. That sort of fell apart. So in the subject story, people are dependent, they have stuff done to them, they obey and receive, and organizations and leaders command them. That story fell apart, I argue, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, Industrial Revolution, rise of the middle class. You just couldn't sustain a story of a God-given few and a naive many. And out of the two world wars, we more or less deliberately, more or less consciously constructed what I call the consumer story. And in the consumer story, the logic becomes the right thing to do is to pursue self-interest on the basis that self-interest will add up to the collective interest, that's how the best society will result. If we aggregate everyone's self-interest, we get the best. And so in that society, in that story, the role of organizations and leaders becomes to serve people. People's role is to demand and choose. They're independent and they have stuff done for them. And what I believe is happening right now is that story is falling apart, just as the subject story did before. And it's because you can't solve the challenges of our time from within its logic. You can't solve crises of loneliness and mental ill health from within a story that says we're independent, isolated individuals. You can't solve crises of inequality from within a story that says that competition is the dynamic that will fix everything, because it engenders inequality. And you can't solve ecological crises, which is how I came to this work, from within a story that says we're separate from nature, that happiness at the individual level, success at the societal level, is all about material standards of living. And so that story is collapsing, and my argument is, to the two examples I just showed you, when that story collapses, the subject story becomes very appealing. The certainty of the sort of strongman leader comes back. But what's possible, and this is what the America in One Room project hints at, is what I call the citizen story, a logic that says actually the right thing to do is neither keep your head down nor do as you're told, nor just pursue self-interest, but actually get involved. Contribute your ideas and energy and resources to the best outcomes. And critically, to reimagine and redesign our institutions to tap into the collective intelligence, collective wisdom, collective resource, to use processes that enable the ideas of everyone to play a meaningful role. In the citizen story, we're interdependent. We do stuff together with and through organizations. We participate and create, and the role of organizations and leaders is to facilitate. There's a whole sideline here that I know Kelly and I were starting to talk about before, about what does this mean in the context of religion and spirituality. And there is a line in a longer version of this table that says religious, material, spiritual. And I think that there's something very interesting for these contexts in that kind of thing. And maybe I should have put doctrinal, but so there's something really interesting about the possibility of exploration. That's a whole other lecture. But this is the framework of ideas that sits at the heart of my work. Are we still with me so far? Okay. So now, what I've been doing since the book came out in 2022 is going, why are we so stuck? What's going on in our politics, and how might we fix it? And who is fixing it? And I stumbled in the course of that on a book that actually has become most famous in the context of relationship therapy. It's called The Power of TED, The Empowerment Dynamic. And I'll share with you the relationship therapy theory, and then I'll show you how I'm applying it in the context of politics. And this is the stuff where I'm starting to need you guys to throw stones at me if you think it's nonsense, okay? So, in the context of relationship therapy, Emerald, this originally is called the drama triangle. It was developed by someone called Stan Cartman in the 60s. And the argument is that relationships of any kind, a group, or whether it's interpersonal or a group relationship, whatever, when they go bad, or when they fall into sort of destructive patterns, these three roles tend to emerge. Someone or some people enter the role of victim, where they step into a role of too little agency. They see everything as happening to them. Without them, the world happens to me. Does that make sense? One or some people step into the role of perpetrator. And these terms are very laden. I want to acknowledge that. So that's one to think about as well. But in the role of perpetrator, the idea is that you step into excessive agency. You see every situation as one where yours is the role to act. If something is to be done, it's yours to do it. And one or some people step into the role of rescuer. They intervene with the perpetrator on behalf of the victim, but actually they're still diminishing the agency of the victim. They're stepping in front of the victim rather than standing alongside them. Does that sort of make sense? So in this context, the argument is that when these patterns establish, they're very hard to break. And what tends to happen is that blame dynamics occur and people start to and then move around rather than breaking out of this dynamic. And so David Emerald came in with this empowerment dynamic idea, saying actually the thing that we need to do is first acknowledge that everyone in this situation is guilty, but no one's to blame. And then we have to say that there's work to do at each of the three poles. The victim needs to claim agency and become a creator. Start to claim their own agency, start to dictate some of the terms. Rescuers need to build the self-reliance, come in behind and alongside the creators rather than stand in front of victims and become supporters. And perpetrators need to cede some control and become challengers. And if you can do that, you go from the drama triangle, perpetrator, rescuer, victim, to a sort of empowerment dynamic, creator supported by challenger and supporter. Politics. This is how I'm thinking about it. Politicians and states have kind of become deliverers. The logic is that the state has to deliver for people, and I think this is across left and right. Institutions, organisations, campaigning organisations, the media, whatever, tend to see themselves as rescuers, trying to save people from a perpetrator. And voters, which is all we become as people, end up as victims, and all we can really do is choose who to give our power to from a fixed set of options, rather than actually having agency, which is then, does that make sense? So what I'm working with is this notion that actually a citizen politics, as opposed to this is what's going on in a consumer politics, where our only agency is to choose between, a citizen politics would see a shift from deliverer, as the role of politicians and states, to enabler, holding questions rather than providing answers. It would see a shift on the role of organisations from rescuer to supporter, organising and coming in alongside rather than mobilising and saying, sign this and we'll do it for you. And victims need to become creators in this language of demonstration over protest. There really is a lot in this talk, but this is the kind of frame. Now I'm going to dive into each of those in a bit more detail. Are you still with me? Feeling okay? Okay, so deliverer to enabler, line one. It's the economy, stupid. So this was famously the sign that Bill Clinton had up in the Oval Office, saying that all politics actually comes down to is grow the economy and everything else will be fine. I think that's the epitome of the sort of delivery mindset in politics. And I still think it's what's driving an awful lot today, as I say, left and right. This was the image that sort of was supposed to be the moment that saved that won the next election, when Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, $700 and something billion to reboot the US economy, and that is very, again, from this kind of, it's the economy stupid, we'll put a load of money, we'll support things, we'll do things for people, we'll deliver a reduction in inflation, and we will get rewarded by being voted for. And my argument really is that this isn't actually, and this is still what is driving an awful lot of the thinking about how politics how you win. And I think there's something different that can happen. And I'm going to give you 3 examples from around the world very quickly. My favourite one comes from Taiwan, and this is the Taiwanese COVID response. Has anyone read the book and read this story? Yeah, a couple of nods. So I'm just going to give you a very tiny version of this. Basically what happened, Taiwan's COVID response is different to anything anywhere else in the world as far as I can tell. I can't really understand why I'm one of the only people still telling this story. But they basically crowdsourced their national response. The president made a speech at the beginning where she said, we don't know how to get through this, but we do know that we'll get through it best if we tap into the ideas and energy and resources of everyone. That's where I got that phrase from. And they set up challenge prizes where people would create apps that would track face mask availability in case outbreaks and these kinds of things. But the beautiful thing was they even set up a phone line where anyone could ring in with ideas for how the country's response could be better, many of which were then incorporated. And one of those ideas was to get the baseball season up and running as quickly as possible because it would boost national morale. And one of the citizen ideas was to create a robot crowd so that there was atmosphere, even though it wouldn't yet be safe to have people in the stadium. And it happened. Like the Taiwanese baseball season started on time with a robot crowd, and it was a big part of national morale. And there are other sort, but this is this sort of spirit of actually we will know best how to deal with this situation if we deal with it together. Second example is from Ireland. Oh dear, I apologise for the quality of this image, but this the pixelated words say the Irish Citizens Assembly. Now remember the 526 randomly selected people in the US who were brought together to discuss. In Ireland, there's a structure now where on key issues, they bring together 100 randomly selected people. They don't just do it for a few days, they do it for a period of several weekends over several months to deliberate on a key divisive issue in the country and make a recommendation as to the legislation that should result that then goes to referendum. It basically is a whole structure that shapes how Irish democracy works. It's like the 4th part of government now. This is how they legalised access to abortion, marriage equality was passed, various other things, and some of the most ambitious climate and biodiversity initiatives in the world came through this structure, bringing people together across divides and actually crucially building unity. So Ireland is now Taiwan and Ireland are the only 2 countries outside the Nordics where trust in government is above 50% at the moment. And so this is a really fascinating dynamic. There's also, in Paris, by the way, there's a standing citizens' assembly that's part of the city governance structure. 100 randomly selected people are essentially the upper house, like the Senate of Paris, is randomly selected. They decide the theme, and bridging me onto my next one, which I'm worried is going to also be horribly pixelated. Damn! But this... So the bridge between, in Paris, that randomly selected group of people decide the theme for 100 million euros a year of participatory budgeting, which is a dynamic which sees ideas, the city asks for ideas from citizens, and then citizens directly vote to allocate the budget, the 100 million euros to those ideas. And this process originates in fuzz. It originates in the late 1980s in Porto Alegre in Brazil. Participatory budgeting started there. It's now in 11,000 municipalities around the world, and Seattle last year, or just recently, distributed $27.5 million directly to citizen ideas. So it's starting to happen in the US as well. And so these are dynamics and modes and stories that are about actually, like I say, politician states moving from delivery to providing the answers to holding questions with people. And my sort of thought experiment to bring this to life is, what if this moment hadn't been about we are putting this into the US? What if it had been let's all of that money was actually spent on, was actually about climate and energy, but they disguised it as inflation reduction because it's the economy stupid, and because there wasn't enough faith in the fact that 70% of US citizens actually want more effective climate action and so on. But if you had gone, same as the Taiwanese president, how can we face into the climate emergency as a country? We've got and we're going to put 700 and something billion into that, but how are we going to spend it? What do you want to do where you are? What are your ideas? Let's recognize that there are micro energy projects all over the country and support them. Let's create a randomly selected citizens jury to be part of the governance structure of how that money is spent. Like in Ireland, let's do participatory budgeting at city level across the country as part of that. Give people agency in how that mission is taken on, rather than do it for them, is kind of the argument I'm making. And so I'm writing something at the moment with some other folks at Harvard, where we're actually taking, and this is to my thing, that this is not just this isn't a Democrat-Republican thing, this is a how we do politics thing. Because arguably this moment, the announcement of the concept of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, is still in this spirit of delivery of politics as delivery, right? It's the state will do things for people and be as efficient as possible in how we do it. And what we're proposing, what we're working up is an idea of what we're calling do-good rather than DOGE, where do-good is an acronym that stands for the Department of Government Opening Our Doors, and actually standing beside people rather than doing for them. I'm going to breathe for a second and just let that settle. Thank you. That was a lovely breath that you just led me on. So that's my sort of first proposition. Deliverer seeds control becomes enabler, holds questions rather than answers. Rescuer to supporter. This I want to talk about. I'm going to be very quick on this because I want to spend a bit more time on the victim to creator shift. But the role of institutions, I think, there's been a couple of examples where that I've been involved in as well, where it's about, if this isn't going to be led from within government, because existing structures of state are quite stuck, how could it be led from outside? How could the space for politics to move into be demonstrated by outside organisations, maybe even by universities? Actually, the first story in this is that the Irish Citizens Assembly originates in a first assembly that was run by a small group of academics out of University College Dublin, running a pilot one and inviting politicians to observe it, and then it got adopted and brought into the framework. So universities, students, citizens, this is where these things begin. But this example, the starting point here is that the default for a lot of big NGOs, big non-profits, is to run campaigns that ask people to sign petitions. And this is what we were told. Does everybody recognise this man, or is he just famous in Britain? This is David Attenborough, my friends. There's some nods now. Good. I haven't jumped completely out of my cultural melee. So David Attenborough, coming to the end of his working life, was making a documentary called Wild Isles about how to save British nature, and we got hold of it, and the NGO, the non-profits, were going to run a petition aligned with the documentary series that was going to say, sign if you want to save British nature. And we were like, hang on, can we do this a bit differently? And so what we actually did was we ran a campaign called the People's Plan for Nature, where we brought together the 3 biggest nature conservation organisations and put them in service as the holders of a big conversation that was about celebrating what community organisations all over the country were already doing, and then a citizens' assembly, this randomly selected group of citizens again, to cohere into a set of recommendations for what should happen in politics. There's a whole story about what happened with that, but just to give you a sense of that shift from sign this petition to we are holding the space. You see the kind of from in front of you to behind you shift that's going on there. Yeah? And then another example of these lovely humans are the Citizens Assembly for Norway's Future. They were brought together, so 2 weeks after my book came out, the first tanks rolled across the Ukrainian border. Norway in that moment became very much wealthier because Norway's wealth is in its sovereign wealth fund, which is oil-based. A few people in Norway read my book, apparently, and decided that what they were going to do was get a group of Norwegian charities, Norwegian non-profits, to run a citizens' assembly on the investment strategy of Norway's sovereign wealth fund. that's what these people did, came up with a whole load of very interesting recommendations about increasing international education and increasing the adoption of participatory democracy approaches, these kinds of things. My favourite thing that's happened since is that this guy, whose name is Jonas Krug, is a social media agency director. And since this happened, Jonas has taken it on himself to create social media films of himself forcing copies of the recommendations of this Citizens' Assembly into the hands of prominent Norwegian politicians. So again, this is what happens when you go from saying the non-profits could have gone, we think that this is what should happen with Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, sign this petition to make it happen, which is what we've always done and hasn't really worked. What they did instead was they came into that hosting role, and now the momentum is really building. Does that make sense, this sort of shift? Okay. Chew, bless you. Okay. This is a lot, I know, but you're gonna like throw things at me in a minute. We've got one more element of this triangle to go. And it's the most important one, because this is where we get to citizens. Citizens moving from victim to creator, claiming agency, moving from protest to demonstration. And I guess the starting point for this is to say, like, voting matters so much, don't get me wrong. I'm not here to do the last lecture of your Future of Citizenship series and go, yeah. That wouldn't be cool. But when it's the extent of our agency, it's super insufficient, because ultimately it will only ever be a choice between a fixed set of options. And we need more than that as humans, is my argument. And when we get to this point where we're just asked to sort of do it, like, suspend your disbelief, believe that these group of people are going to fix everything for us, ultimately people then slide out of it and start to be attracted by some other options, right? And I'll give you a bit of a flavour of, but there is something else starting to build. And the stories I want to tell you here, the first one takes me back to Taiwan. Now, the backstory of that crowdsourced COVID response is a citizen movement. What it was a citizen movement called GovZero, actually started among the software design community in Taiwan, computer programmers. And the reason they called themselves GovZero is because what they did was they built parallel websites to government websites, all of which had the URLs g0v.tw instead of .gov.tw, and demonstrated how a participatory democracy might work. So they created budget.g0v.tw and made available all of the data from the national budget for people to upvote and downvote and comment and discuss. And they demonstrated a different way that things could operate. And this was in response to government going, shush little people, just go shopping, essentially, like saying, we'll sort it all, don't worry about it. And then a couple of years on, once this had been going, the government tried to rush through a trade bill with mainland China under the banner of the Economic Power-Up Plan. And a protest broke out, and this was the inside of the parliament during that protest. And what's actually going on here, this is at the end of a day, but you can see they've sort of moved all the big chairs out of the way, and they're in small groups and discussion circles and things. What they were doing in the parliament was they occupied the parliament on the model of Occupy protest, but they were using the GovZero tools, discussion menus, upvote, downvote stuff, to discuss the clauses of the trade bill that was going to be rushed through parliament. And in that moment, the whole thing shifted, because this footage of this got streamed all over the country, and people could see that there was a different way of doing things. And they wanted it. But what had happened was that this movement hadn't just protested against Parliament, against the way of operating. It was demonstrating a different way that things could work. It was proposing something. And what happened in the aftermath was that a load of the people who'd been involved in the GovZero movement effectively were invited into politics. So I last year, and I'll share you at the end of this the where you can find it, but I hosted the Taiwanese, Audrey Tang, who started out as a hacker in the GovZero movement, and then after this first became a mentor to a government minister, and then became a minister in her own right, in a 4-year career trajectory. And I hosted her in London last year to learn the lessons of that shift. This is about demonstrating, showing how this could operate. Us not just protesting, but showing what could be. There's a huge, real deep history to this, and this is a campaign that if anyone's looks at British history, this is something you should go and dig into. In the 1830s, in the context of the Industrial Revolution, there was a worker movement called the Chartists, who basically, on the factory floors, crowdsourced a list of 6 demands for how the rules of politics should change. Not as they're propositions, like these are the rules we want to embed. They weren't campaigning for a policy issue. They were showing how the process could work. And the petition got so many signatures that this cartoon was drawn showing it trying to be forced through the door of Parliament, that it couldn't fit through the door. But it built up from the ground up, people saying this is how we want our politics to work. And then just to bring this to life, and as my last story, to bring it back to this context, a university, the student population, I'm going to take you to Poland. And I'm just going to show you, to start with, this is a group I'm working with a lot at the moment. I'm going to show you a little video of the viral film that they made in the run-up to the parliamentary election in 2023, when the far right were, if they won, would hold power fully for a very long time. And this is how the student movement mobilized the young female vote in particular.
Kobiety mają w tej chwili lepiej niż miały 10 lat temu.
Rząd Prawa i Sprawiedliwości jest rządem, który kobietę stawia na piedestale.
Kobieta jest czymś pośrednim między mężczyzną a dzieckiem.
Tworzy się sztuczną narrację właśnie jakąś piękne dla kobiet.
Kobieta też musi dojrzeć do tego, żeby być dobrą matką, ale jak do 25 roku sobie daje przyjemność.
To jest zwierzęta to wiedzą. Dzikie zasoby węgla ma Polska. Nasze zmiany klimatu czarnym złotem, jak niektórzy mówią.
My mamy zapasy węgla na 200 lat.
Dla kobiety sukces edukacyjny to w głównej mierze rozrywka. Ona nie potrzebuje go aż tak bardzo jak mężczyzna.
Całkowicie bezpiecznie, militarnie i finansowo.
Od czasu do czasu robimy zakłady właśnie po to, żeby niepełnosprawni powinni starać się wyrównać pełnosprawnym. A nie
Naturalnym postępowaniem brońmy nas przed ideologią LGBT.
pochodzi z tego samego korzenia, co narodowy socjalizm hitlerowski. Ja bym to badał, ale... Dla kobiety sukces, kobieta jest...
Kobiety nie mają głosu.
That was the election date in Poland. This ad came out 2 weeks before, went viral, and this gesture became a viral gesture on the streets of Poland. And voter turnout among young women in particular, 18 to 34-year-old women, went up something like 40% from election to election, and that was the deciding factor in the far right losing that election. But this is my classic story of why the vote one more time thing is not enough. Because what then happened is that the policies that they had advocated for were not enacted. And in 2025, this year, there was a presidential election in Poland, and these guys tried to mobilize to make sure that the far right didn't win that election, and they failed. Because their constituency didn't feel that they'd been listened to, didn't feel that what they were saying had actually happened. And so what these guys are now doing, the organisation is called Skud, which means sunrise in Polish. This translates as Skud presents the plan for generations. They are crowdsourcing a charter for the future of Poland from the student body across the country in order to propose a structure, a way of working that Polish politics could move into, rather than just trying to get the vote out. Does that make sense? It's the shift I'm talking about, yeah? So this, I'm pretty much there. So this is what I'm saying, what I'm articulating, what I'm exploring at the moment, and we don't have loads of time, but like I said, we do have a little bit before I know you all have to scoot off to the next thing. But I'd love any challenges or take me back or wherever, because this is the thinking that I'm developing as a kind of proposition. The idea is that where we are at the moment is we're kind of trapped in this model where politicians and states see their role as being, if something is to be done, it's theirs to do it. It's the economy stupid, we will grow the economy for you. Institutions see themselves as rescuers, and voters only choose who to give their power to. And what I'm proposing is a model where actually we get to a place where we have creative citizens in the lead, government enabling and holding questions and missions and challenges, and institutions supporting and helping us get there. That's kind of me. I'll come back to that in a minute. This is who I am, and you can find me at these. There's a mailing list on my website if you scroll right to the bottom. And I also now co-host a podcast called How to Save Democracy with a Tunisian woman called Omazine Khalifa, who was an activist in the Arab Spring and then became a politician in Tunisia. We've interviewed Audrey Tang. We've hosted the Irish people behind the Irish Assembly, and so you can learn more about these things there if you want to. But that, I'm going to come back to that proposition slide and shut up.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions. There's some microphones. If you could share your name and your major, that would be very helpful.
There's one just behind you, I think, actually. Oh. Hey.
Hey, so I'm actually going to be the one holding this, but I had a question. So this is going to be kind of specific, but so the organizations. Oh, sorry, I forgot. I'm Jacob. I'm a Middle East Studies major, and I'm from California. Yeah, so those organizations that you mentioned, like the one here in the U.S. and the one in Ireland, I love those. I think they're so cool. I actually participated in one a few weeks ago, but something that like we found is that a lot of the people participating in those things were already kind of open to like new ideas and like reducing political polarization. I was wondering if you had any more insight into how we could maybe pull people into those who aren't really open to those.
Lovely. So, and just so I understand, so in that context, it was a sort of open invite. Anyone could come and be part of it. Mm-hmm. So that's where these sorts of processes are really different. There's a process called sortition, which is random selection to be and then filtered to be representative of the national population. So people aren't invited. It's not an open invitation. People are selected to create that sample, and they're paid to be part of it. And so you actually have a nationally representative sample. So the way it works is you send out a big number of invites, you get a reasonable number of people saying they're willing, but you're paying, so it's not just the usual suspects, and then you select a sample to be representative. And so in Ireland you had teachers, lorry drivers, single parents, like these sorts of things. In Paris, the structure includes refugees and migrants in the calculation. And so when you have that randomly selected representative sample, that's how it makes it really different. If you want to know more about these kinds of processes, I would really recommend two organisations to check out. One is called Democracy Next, and which is a global organisation. I'm an advisor to them. And the best US one is called Healthy Democracy, and they work very much with these random selection approaches. But that's how you don't just get. Sometimes in the work people describe what happens when you just say whoever comes, we're going to have this conversation. Those things are valuable, don't get me wrong, but there's a slightly nasty phrase, the turn-upocracy, right? And you have to get away from that, and the way to do that is the random selection. Yay? Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Balin, and I'm a nursing major, and I really liked how you included models from different countries around the world, because not one country is perfect. And I was just wondering how you thought we can incorporate some of those models into the United States in our own communities.
I mean, I think this is, well, firstly, what I'd say is it's starting to happen. So to Jacob's question, the specific of those assembly structures, there have been, I think, 5 in the US over the last 3 or 4 years that are real true assemblies. I went to visit the group who ran one in Fort Collins, Colorado this year on the land use of a stadium, of an old stadium site in the city, Petaluma, California. I could go on, but they're starting to happen. And what you can do, and I mean, Brigham Young's a pretty influential spot in Provo and in Salt Lake City. Like if there were a student organization for participatory democracy that said these are the sorts of things we can do, and you had, I believe you have the odd ex-councilman on involved in BYU. He's somewhere in the room pretending he's not here. Then that sort of thing. That's how this happens. So, like it starts with it tends to start not from within the political structures. It tends to start from demand from citizens for a different way of doing things, being heard by more the sort of enlightened and open-minded of the people in positions in politics who then step in and embrace it. So organising, starting to understand these modes. You could even do an assembly in the governance of BYU, right? Like that's happening in some universities around the world. These sorts of ways of piloting and practicing are a huge part. So yeah, and learn more. One more question. Can we come down here, or have we got someone at the back there? Come down here for me.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I love reading your book. We talked about a lot of citizens coming together for different issues, specifically climate change and other social issues. Have there been movements with regards to medicine and sustainable creative solutions for medicine, and besides like the COVID response?
It's a good question. I'm afraid I don't know specifically. Trying to think of any particular examples. I don't know, I'm afraid. I think the spaces where I think this has. So maybe what I'll just say in response to that as a final question. The Irish Assembly is, I think, a particularly interesting one, because what it's become. The civil servant, I hosted the civil servant who leads these processes, the politics professor who initiated it, and one of the randomly selected citizens for a panel conversation recently that's now one of our podcast episodes. And one of the things that Art O'Leary, who's the civil servant, said, he said, this has become how Ireland gets hard decisions made. And so things that start to become divisive, things that start to be difficult, that becomes the outlet. And I think that could be, so if there were I'm actually talking to some folks about the US health context at the moment, and RFK saying he's going to stop the kind of the comment on the process. I don't know if people have seen this, but there's this whole thing about the moment we're in, I think, is one where because the view is that people are consumers, and that therefore the right thing for politicians and states to do is to find answers for them, what's starting to happen is that we're seeing comment periods and all the participation that does exist actually being rolled back, because it feels like inefficiency if you're in that frame. And what these ways of working are about saying is, like, you've got to think of the whole thing differently. It's if you're trying to do things for people, then you're trying to do it efficiently, and all you're asking them for is feedback and response. If you're doing things with people, you're trying to open up to as much participation as possible as early as possible. You're seeing them as sources of the ideas rather than just responders to the plan. And that in Ireland is really kind of becoming formalised into the structure of government, which is very interesting. Does that help a little bit? I know it's not a direct answer. very seriously, folks, if you sit with this and digest, like there's I can send a link around as well to a talk I did somewhere where you can sort of recoup a little bit. I think this has been recorded as well, but I really would love to hear if you go home and you're like, I disagree with this bit, or I don't understand this bit, or that language was wrong. This is really genuinely me kind of going, this is what I'm thinking and what I'm trying to write. If you guys are smart, challenge me, and I would really love it. Is that okay? Thank you for having me.